Making better wealth decisions requires that you have the mental capacity to make those decisions. What if you are dealing with a family member who might be lacking in the acuity? We're going to be talking to an expert with regard to making better wealth decisions for people who are dealing with dementia and a loss of their ability to make decisions in the first place.
This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast dedicated to helping pre-retirees and retirees manage risk and economic uncertainty by adopting a pension-style approach to improve your risk-return trade-off. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto.
This week, we're speaking with Dr. Jill Aiken. She is the founder of For Better Minds, which is an organization dedicated to bringing cognitive stimulation therapy to individuals experiencing mild cognitive impairment and early dementia. She holds a PhD from Cambridge University, and through her work, she has seen firsthand how cognitive decline impacts not only memory and daily functioning, but also judgment, decision-making, and financial vulnerability. Dr. Aiken, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I'm going to call you Jill if I may. May I call you Jill?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's begin by asking the obvious question, and that is, how does dementia have an impact on anyone's ability to manage their finances?
Yes, it's a good question. We could possibly just start with, in terms of just normal aging, how does normal aging impact our ability to manage our finances? So it's been demonstrated that it's when someone is in their early 50s that they're at their peak of financial acuity. Did you know that?
I did not.
Okay, yes. So our brain's information processing speed declines as we age. So declines from about age 19. And then it's been shown that in our early 50s, it's a bit of a crossover phase where we still have a pretty good information processing speed, but it coincides with what people call crystallized intelligence or accumulated knowledge. And we have high accumulated knowledge in our 50s. So in terms of normal aging, broadly speaking, we make fewer mistakes and we make better financial decisions in our 50s than in our 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s. And then if we extrapolate on that, we would say then in our 80s and 90s, we're probably making more mistakes and overlooking more things than in our 60s or 70s. So financial management is often the first instrumental activity of daily living to decline because it requires high-level cognitive skills, so executive function, memory, and calculation. And these can be compromised by normal cognitive changes that come with aging in our 80s and 90s, so even without dementia. And then in terms of dementia, memory, of course, particularly short-term memory, which so many people are familiar with, is one of the biggest areas of cognition affected. So major problems with forgetting to pay bills, forgetting you even had a bill to pay, or paying bills twice and losing financial documents. It's just a huge challenge.
So everything you said coincides with what I would have expected intuitively. Slippery slope, didn't know what the fulcrum was, where the age started to, where things went from being better to worse. And I don't think there really is a single, it's not like you can say, well, if you're at this age, you will certainly experience this amount of decline, because it varies from individual to individual.
Absolutely.
Could you maybe walk us through, given that that's the case, could you maybe walk us through early warning signs, things that you might, you get a sense that, hey, I think mom is not quite on the ball, or like, grandpa missed that. Grandpa doesn't usually miss that. What are the sorts of things that you can point to as being things that would cause maybe loved ones, family members to have a bit of an aha moment and try to intercede in some manner?
Mm-hmm. Yes, families often see signs years before a formal diagnosis. And so many families will say to me, that they saw things coming. So even 6, sometimes people will say 10 years before. But in terms of finances, in early stages, someone might still be able to manage basic tasks, but the complex ones really pose problems. So there was an interesting paper published in 2020, and it was a long-term study looking at people's credit ratings leading up to a diagnosis of dementia. I thought it was really interesting in that the researchers saw that older adults had problems managing financial obligations up to 6 years before a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And then people who develop dementia were also more likely to have their credit scores drop into the subprime range about 2.5 years before diagnosis. So, and that speaks to, I think, the missed bill paying. And so your credit score is dropping. So some really apparent signs that they're struggling financially due to cognition is one of the big ones that a lot of people will identify with is frequently forgetting PIN numbers for bank cards or login credentials and frequently getting locked out of their accounts. And then, of course, there's unopened mail and ignored bills, missed credit card payments, unpaid taxes, misplacing financial documents. Another one that I have seen as well is, you can hear possibly a little bit of suspicion or paranoia. So having fear that money is being stolen from you when in fact it was you that moved the money out or made a payment, but you forgot you did it. So then when you go through your accounts, you see that money's been moved out or it's been paid for something and you can't remember that you've done it. And so you think that it's been someone else in there.
It strikes me as being, for some people where that's the case, borderline terrifying, because you feel as though what's going on, I don't have control. I don't know who I can trust. I don't know who I can talk to. But, there's another $218 gone from my account this week, when all it was the monthly, Enbridge bill or whatever. And it was set up for automatic deductions, and you forgot that, which, by the way, that would probably be a pretty good hack. If you're the sort of person who forgets to do things monthly, if you can set things to be paid automatically, that would probably help to curb at least that tendency. But the laundry list you gave me, Jill, was pretty extensive. There's a lot of things that could be warning signs.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I would also like to add, I think we all see it just in our lives, that the banks are really encouraging people to move everything online. So
Right.
No paper statements. And then people also often receive invoices just online or through email without having a paper copy. So that can really throw people, because it is such a mental obstacle to have the confidence and, of course, to have the ability to be logging into your accounts and tracking things. A lot of people can do it.
Yeah. So far, we've just been talking about the mundane day-to-day, forgot to pay this bill, moved the money from A to B, and didn't realize we had done so. But there's obviously something more nefarious afoot, and that is there are oftentimes situations where people are being taken advantage of as a result of their cognitive impairment. What can you tell us about that in terms of how widespread it is and what can be done to counteract that, and what sorts of signs we should be looking for there?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So dementia is a recognized disability, right? And older people are in the vulnerable sector, and especially older people with dementia are in the vulnerable sector. And so what I mean by the vulnerable sector, this is a group of people in society that, due to age or disability, are in a position of dependence and of they're at a greater risk of harm or fraud than the general population. So people with dementia are particularly vulnerable to financial exploitation due to, the combination of, I used to be able to look after my finances and now I can't, and now I have to bring in someone else. So it's increased dependency on someone else. And then depending on the integrity of that person that you're bringing in, that will dictate the outcome of the situation. So the cognitive impairment, so particularly in the memory and executive function and attention, people who have been around people with dementia will see that the attention span is so short, and that when someone is trying to do a task, they will leave the task multiple times, have to be pulled back into it. So you can't really finish if you've logged in and you're trying to solve a problem, in your bank account, you'll probably leave you'll leave your computer before it's done. So someone else needs to help.
Right.
And like I said, depending on the integrity of that person that's coming in to help, then that
And I
how
can see
credible you are.
situations where you work and you try 5 times before you can finally log in, but then somewhere along the way you reach another impediment, another roadblock that you can't figure out how to navigate, and before long you've timed out, and now you've got to go back to square one. And a lot of people, what you said earlier about the reliance on someone else because of the fact that you don't want to admit that somehow the stuff that you did with no problem for 24 years is now suddenly something that you can't do, and you need someone. And let's talk now about what you said a moment ago about the integrity of the person that has to step in, because it seems to me that is a major consideration. What proactive steps can people take if they're dealing with having to have a family member ensure that that person, or it could be a neighbor, it doesn't have to be a family member, but having the person that assists demonstrate integrity and ensure that the interests of the person that actually has the assets is not being taken advantage of?
Well, that's a good question, because it depends on, who the person has in their kind of circle of care. If you're thinking about your parents and you have their best interests in mind and you want to protect them against other people who may not have their best interest in mind, what is really recommended, some things to do would be just, first off, take a real inventory of what your parents have. So all the bank accounts, the credit cards, the insurance and pensions and financial statements, and get that all together, and maybe even make copies of it for yourself so you know what exists where. And then, try to put them in a secure place for your parents to find them again, and take down the usernames and the passwords. So, gather all the financial accounts and all the financial documents. And of course, you should always put together a durable power of attorney. So power of attorney has to be done when your parents are still capable of making decisions, and when they're cognitively well. So that is then, if they cannot then make decisions on their own, or they become incapacitated, you can step in, of course, and look after things. So some of the recommended actions are like to reduce the number of credit cards and bank accounts. If they're no longer needed, reducing the number of credit cards will really help tracking them. And also it will reduce the opportunities of getting defrauded. And also reducing the limits on the credit card. So you can do that now by just logging in. So if you were logging into your parents' account with your parents, and then you can decrease or lower the limit so that it's not misused, right? And set up automatic payments and update the passwords in case of any. Some people use the same simple password for all their online accounts. So you might want to update the passwords and, of course, write them down and make sure your parents have them. Another thing that I find that's really excellent is just enabling alerts. So I do that for my own accounts and for my mother's, in that when there's a withdrawal or there's a payment, I will get a text. And when the balance of the bank account is maybe below a threshold, I will also get a text. So that is really excellent. And then you can see money moving in and out, and immediately. So there is no delay. So if something goes wrong, you're on top of it.
Just like that. Yeah. So one of the things I noticed listening to you speak, Jill, is the extreme overlap between what you're talking about and other people that I've had on the podcast talking about proper estate planning, having wills, powers of attorney, and then knowing where the documents are, knowing what the account numbers are, knowing what the passwords are, letter of wishes, all of those things. It seems to me, I guess until just now, it really hadn't dawned on me that the thought process and the rationale is, for all intents and purposes, identical with regard to protecting you against any kind of dementia and mental impairment, and just the longer term estate planning, which includes, a lot of why you have an enduring power of attorney is to protect the interests of the person who has the assets, both in terms of property and personal care, from being incapacitated, which includes having dementia. Let's talk about legal implications for families. Let's say there's a situation where there's been something fraudulent has happened, and the family has to intervene. Maybe Junior was taking advantage of mom and dad, and Sis didn't really like the fact that Junior took some money out. Are there things that you would recommend, A, to prevent it, and then B, if you can't prevent it, to deal with it and remedy it after the fact, to at least prevent it from recurring and to make sure that everyone's on the same page going forward?
I would say to try to prevent it. It's recommended to, really start conversations early, of course, and proactively. And when things are decided, to tell your siblings, what has been decided, keep them really in the loop so that your siblings would know too that, just say they know that the brother or sister is watching the accounts. So their parents are less vulnerable to being taken advantage of. If your parents don't want help, like I feel in my situation, I think a lot of older people are nervous about their vulnerability to scams or to fraud. So offering help to help shore things up can come as a relief sometimes. But for parents who don't want help, I think you can offer a couple of times, and explain your positioning, mentioning that, scams can be very sophisticated and we'd really like to help protect you. So to go back to your question about prevention, I think communication with your siblings is best after the fact. I have seen many situations where I guess I say that siblings have been given money by the parents and other siblings are upset about that. And I think after the fact, there's really, at least right now, there's not a lot that can be done. I know people get into lawsuits then within their family, and it's horrible. And I've even seen, people who are, I saw one case where a gentleman was waiting on a geriatric assessment. So was kind of like waiting on a diagnosis. And he just got up one day and went and bought a new car. Even though their children were really watching the accounts, they didn't know that their father was out buying a new car. And so then all of a sudden a new car came into the driveway and it was all signed off at the dealership. And this gentleman then within 10 days got a diagnosis of dementia and lost his license. And there really was no recourse to bring that vehicle back and to get the contract canceled. I mean, it is really difficult. It is really difficult.
So really telling real life story. It's thank you for that story. Those are the sorts of things that you really never think about.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just ask a couple more questions before I let you go. So this is a really, it's a delicate topic and it's very difficult to bring up. If you are concerned, A, because perhaps you have a sibling that's taking advantage of your parents, or because your parents are declining, but they don't want to admit it because of their pride and everything else, how does one even broach the subject in a way that actually moves things forward so that you can actually get to the point where you can take actions, as a prophylactic to prevent bad things from happening if you can get out in front of it? How do you actually even start that conversation?
Well, again, so early and just approaching your parents or your loved one to say, I'm concerned and I'd really like to help protect you. And these are the reasons why I'm concerned. And, would you be open to us working on this together? And then, getting the powers of attorney settled, letting your siblings know, letting people know. And if there's an accountant and, a bank manager involved, letting them know too of the powers of attorney and what's been done so that people are aware that, safeties have been put into place.
All right. So Jill, you're the founder of forbetterminds.com. And I want to encourage the people listening to go to forbetterminds.com if they want to learn more about what to do with cognitive impairment. Before I let you go, I have one final question. The podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. If it was up to you, Jill, what advice would you give people? I'm going to ask you open-endedly to help them make better wealth decisions.
I would say to make better wealth decisions, get good advice. If it's not your specialty, get advice from a specialist.
Thank you so much. Jill Aiken, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. ForBetterMinds.com is where you can find more for the people listening. And I want to wish you all the best going forward.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. Thank you.
If you're worried about the current investment climate and your money, go to my website to book a call for personalized advice to assist you in feeling secure and protected about your retirement.